Morning. Some of you may wonder, how is it that they choose the different speakers? You know, how does a person like me get up here? Or how do they pick a person like me to get up here? So I thought I might give you a little history of how that happens, a little goings-on, at least as far as with me. First of all, for myself, I have a confession to make in that I'm basically a lazy person. I like to say I have a lot of inertia. It just takes me a lot to get going, but I think my father would have used the term lazy. And for me, a good Sunday is that I get up on Sunday morning and I don't have any responsibilities. I get up and I drink a cup of coffee, preferably one that Sarah's already got up and made the coffee. And then I sit there and read the news to see what's happened while I was sleeping in the world. Maybe eat a piece of toast with peanut butter or something. And then get up and get ready and come to church, go to class, somebody else's class, and come in here and participate in a worship service. And for me, that's a good Sunday. It's not that I mind doing those things. It's just like I said, I'm a lazy person. I'd rather just come and sit and be a part of it. Well, a few weeks ago, Jack texted me on a Saturday morning, and says, "Good morning, brother. I was wondering if you could be a backup Sunday in case Tyler's unable to make it at the last minute. Thanks." This was Saturday morning. Now, my phone was sitting right there by me, and I looked over and I saw the message come up. And I didn't even pick my phone up. I just read it and left it there. And I thought, man. And I thought, well, maybe if I just delay a little bit. But Jack waited me out. So 2 hours later, I say, I don't have anything prepared, but I will do it if you can't. I said, but I will do what I can if you don't have another option. I thought I'd give him a hint, kind of push him. When he comes back, well, I'll get back with you. A little while later, he says, Bo, I have not been able to find anyone. The others are out of town or in hospital. Hopefully Tyler will be able to make it, but it is always a late notice on his part. So, there you go. If I'm here, it's because everybody else is out of town or they're in the hospital. So bear that in mind. I didn't volunteer. Just pray for some of those people in the hospital. But I would like to talk about what for me is one of the most significant passages in the Bible. And that's Matthew 28:19 and 20. It says, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age." Well, one of the reasons I say it's significant is because you have to think this is one of the last things Jesus said before he ascended into heaven. And you have to imagine or believe that if this is his last commandment to us, his last instructions, it's got to be significant, right? I mean, if you were telling somebody that, hey, guys, the whole world depends on you doing something, what would your instructions be? Well, Jesus' instructions to us was to make disciples. And then he tells us how to do it. Make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to observe all that I command you. Well, baptizing them. Well, we know something has to happen before baptizing, right? So why did Jesus say baptizing? And why did he say teach them to believe? Because they have to believe before they can be baptized. And also, why did he just say teach them my commands instead of teaching them to obey my commands? Because they have to know those commands to be able to obey them. But he didn't. He said, baptize, teach them how to obey. Well, I think it's because of our nature, and what we see in the world is that too often that's what we do. We teach people to believe, or teach them what they need to know to believe. And then some faith traditions think that's enough. But then we teach them the commands. We don't teach to obey the commands. I mean, you think about teachers when you're in your classroom, what is your goal? Are you teaching the commands? Which is they need to be done. I'm not just trying to discount that, but are you teaching them the commands? Are you teaching, is your goal to teach them how to obey the commands? And of course, the bottom line is we're making disciples. We have to make disciples. So to make disciples, you have to, first of all, answer yourself two questions. First what's a disciple? What is a disciple? I think if you ask some people what a disciple was, they would point to the apostles. And they'd say, well, they were disciples. Well, they were disciples. But there were other disciples. You know, to be an apostle, you had to be a disciple. But to be a disciple, you didn't have to be an apostle. And so you have that one end, being a disciple is where the apostles were. But then you talk to other people, and they might tell you, well, to be a disciple, that means you believe in Jesus Christ. Well, actually, what believing does, believing, according to John chapter 1, believing gives you the right to be a disciple. It doesn't make you a disciple, it gives you the right. It's kind of like buying a bus ticket. You bought the bus ticket, you have the right to get on the bus, but you got to get on the bus. So where are we? What is a disciple to us? Well, for me, I found a definition that I kind of like. It says, someone who is following Jesus, being changed by Jesus, and is committed to the mission of Jesus. Do you follow Jesus? Are you changed by Jesus? And are you committed to Jesus' mission? And then again, you'd have to be able to answer yourself, what is that mission? Well, you know, in the Bible, we have a really good example of making disciples. We have an example of God making disciples. Actually, it's of God taking an entire nation of people and making them disciples. He took a nation of slaves and turned them into disciples. And you find that in the book of Exodus. We talk about the nation of Israel. Well, to start with, you have to kind of know the world that the nation of Israel was living in at the time when God came to them to make them disciples. They were living in a polytheistic world, means that they had many gods. The people that surrounded them had many gods. Believe it or not, we live in a polytheistic world. We live in a world where there are many gods. We don't call them Jupiter or Zeus or any of the names like that, but we live in a world with many gods. For most of the world, they believe that way. So, in an ancient polytheistic society, though, polytheistic societies, they weren't exclusive with their gods. You know, it's kind of a foreign thing for us in that we believe in a monotheist. We believe in one God. We believe in one true God. There's no other gods. Whenever people mention other gods, we just discount that and say that's not really a God. But that wasn't the case for people of this time. They believed in their gods, but they also were accepting of other gods, or accepting of allowing other people to believe in those gods. They weren't exclusive. For example, if they came upon well, wait a minute. Let me back up a second. They accepted these other gods, but they judged those gods. If they came upon another societies with different gods, they wouldn't say those gods didn't exist. They would look at those gods and they would rate them. How do those gods compare to our gods? And they would do that by looking at those other gods' disciples. If they came upon another society that with their different gods and that society was prosperous, then they would say, well, those were good gods. As a matter of fact, if they were really prosperous in one area, they might even offer sacrifices or gifts to those other gods. They say, these are good gods. They really grow good wheat over there. I'm going to offer a god to their god of wheat. Another way they would look, though, is they would look at how devoted were those disciples. They may be a prosperous society, but if those disciples weren't devoted, then they just may kind of discount those gods still and say, well, maybe it's just luck. So they looked at the disciples' prosperity, they looked at their devotion. The other thing is if their society conquered another society, then their gods were much more powerful. Their gods of war were more powerful than those gods of the other society. So basically, they were judging the gods, but they were judging the gods by the way their disciples acted. If you look at the Roman general Titus, the Roman general Titus is the Roman general that conquered Jerusalem. When he conquered Jerusalem, he went back to Rome, and they gave him a triumph. The triumph was a big parade. Some of you may have read Shakespeare, Julius Caesar, when you were in high school or something. You remember in that Shakespeare described a triumph that they were given to Caesar. But a triumph, they would have this triumph, and they would parade all these prisoners, all of these things they captured, different things. They would parade them through the city with the Roman general. And then afterwards, if it was really special, they would build an arch to this triumph. Well, if you go to Rome today, they have an arch for Titus and his conquering of Jerusalem. And you can look inside of that, on one of the inner walls in that arch, there's a relief. In that relief, it's the sacking of Jerusalem. And very distinctly, you can see one soldier carrying off the menorah. The menorah that was in the holy place in the temple. And why would they do that? Why would they put, of all things, a menorah up there, a lamp? Why would they put a soldier of the most obvious thing that they're carrying out? Because it represented to the Jews their God. And that was the way for the Romans to say, our God's greater than your God. See, we conquered your God and carried off his symbol. So when you know this the way these ancient societies looked at their gods, and that kind of helps you understand the way that God dealt with the Egyptians for the benefit of the Israelites. If you consider, if you would, that what if consider that we, because of our knowledge of Scripture, know that God put Joseph in a position to help, to bring the Israelites into Egypt. And we see that. When we think of the idea of the Israelites going into Egypt, we go to Joseph and how he was sold into slavery and the different things he went to get to that position, to be in a position to help. But, it was really Pharaoh that invited the Israelites into Egypt. Most of the world, that's what they would see. To the people of that time, they would see that generous Pharaoh invited the Israelites to come in. It was generous Pharaoh that gave them this prime property so that they could grow and prosper. And then it was also an evil Pharaoh that put them in slavery. It was an evil Pharaoh that commanded the murder of their male children be thrown into the Nile River. Pharaoh was one of the gods of the Egyptians. And then you take into account that for 400 years, the Israelites probably hadn't even heard from God. You know, we talk about the silent 400 years between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Well, there was also 400-year period of silence between the patriarchal age and the Mosaic age. So what do you think the people of Egypt believed about their gods compared to the gods of the Israelites? What do you think the Israelites believed? I mean, for 400 years, I can't even trace my family back 400 years. For 400 years, they've lived under these gods that were so powerful, and their God is basically had done nothing for them in their eyes. So you think of that. That's the condition the Israelites were in, the Egyptians were in when God had they finally turned to God after Pharaoh started murdering their babies. They turned to God and cried for help, and God answered. So how do you think they were feeling at this time? Well, now this God comes along, and basically, the good thing about this God, though, is he didn't even ask them to trust him. He asked Moses to, but the Israelites, they had to do nothing to begin with. God spoke to Moses, and he told him that these are the things that we're going to do. You're going to go and you're going to speak to Pharaoh, and I'm going to harden his heart. We're going to perform these miracles, and I'm going to harden his heart. And then this is key, is that he's told him that, tell him that Israel is my firstborn son, and that if he doesn't let my people go, I will kill his firstborn son. So that promise was there waiting. So what were those 10 plagues, 10 miracles? Those 10 miracles that God performed through Moses all attacked Egyptian gods. Every one of them, or at least one or more of the Egyptians' God showed that he was superior to that God. He did that. Why do you think he did that? Well, he did that because no one believed he was a powerful God. Not the Egyptians, not the Israelites. That's why for the first 9 plagues, the Israelites did nothing. There was no requirement for them to do anything. God was doing those plagues regardless of what the Israelites did, right? Well, that's kind of like us in our belief today. For us, when grace is afforded to us. Why? Because of what we've done. You know, grace was extended to us 2,000 years before we were even born. That grace is there no matter what we do. The same thing with the Israelites. Those miracles were performed to show that he was God regardless of what they did. And then it comes to the 10th plague. Now, God didn't ask them to do anything for 9 plagues, but the 10th plague, he says, no, you're going to have to do something this time. And what did he have them do? He had them take a male lamb and stake it out there for 4 days for all of Egypt to see. Now, to the Egyptians, sacrificing animals was an abomination, especially a male lamb, because the Egyptian god Amun, A-M-U-N, was a powerful god, and the symbol for him was a ram. And I kind of find it interesting in that he took a male lamb, which is a baby ram, right? And what did Pharaoh do? He took the male baby boys and had them murdered. You know, that's just interesting to me because of the fact that if you go out and read Leviticus, you know, I don't know how you believe, but for me, I believed at one time that all sacrifices were male lambs. If you go and read Leviticus, you find that's not true. As a matter of fact, the only time a male lamb is told to be sacrificed is Passover. So I have to believe that that was more than a coincidence. But he sacrificed those, he had them stake the male lambs out, and then he has them kill those lambs and smear blood over the door. The Israelites were taking quite a, they were kind of putting it out here now. Before they had to do nothing, but now they have to stand with God. They have to, this isn't something that was a casual thing. This was something that they had to really ponder, to think about, because you're saying, okay, I'm taking this, I'm taking a stand with this God that's fixing to kill the son of Pharaoh. I mean, when you were choosing a team there, you were choosing a team that was fixing to be hated. So God took these people who had probably basically no belief or a weak belief in their God, and now has turned them into taking a stand, a life or death stand with him. For us, we do that, don't we? We take a life or death stand. You know, those Israelites, they were children of Israel, right? What if they hadn't have done that? What if they had not gone into that door with the blood over it? Where would they have been? Would their firstborn males have been saved? You had to be under that blood. So now God's, one more time, he's performed a miracle. And the other thing is that when God was doing these miracles, you know, he said that he would harden Pharaoh's heart. The first 6 or 7, Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Pharaoh hardened his heart. But when you get to like the 7th, 8th, and 9th plague, it specifically says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. I believe it's worded that way because it's showing us that God was also convincing the Israelites, not just Pharaoh. Pharaoh may have already kind of been predisposed to letting them go, but God wasn't complete yet. He hadn't finished what he wanted to do, so he hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he could convince the Israelites that they needed to believe in him. So God took these weak slaves who could not defend their children from a more powerful nation, and he struck fear into the hearts of those people that opposed them. God had one more miracle that he had to do, and he had to harden Pharaoh's heart one more time. And the reason for that was because Pharaoh still had this strong army. Pharaoh had a strong army and the world would still believe that Pharaoh was strong, or they still might be confused in their belief about who was stronger. But God hardened Pharaoh's heart one more time so that he could destroy that army. Of course, we know that miracle is when he drowned them in the Red Sea. So what had that done? That it convinced the Israelites to believe in God. It moved them from just believing to action. When we are, as Christians, we go from belief, we go from unbelief to belief to action. Just like the Israelites were saved from going on that door and going through the Red Sea, we're saved by going by move to action through baptism. And when the Israelites finally came to Jericho, they spent their 40 years in the wilderness. They come to Jericho, and it's destroyed. In Joshua, we read about Jericho, and that kind of tells us a little bit about what's gone on with as far as God moving these people in this direction. Is that In Joshua 2, verses 8 through 11, as before the men lay down, she came up to them on a roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the waters of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God, and in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. You see, God had taken these people, this weak slave nation of slaves, made them a powerful nation by now. And the people could see this. They could see this but they also saw God working. God working because God did those things. God dried up the Red Sea so that they could cross. But also they saw that how devoted the disciples now were, because they were able to defeat these armies. So, what did the Israelites learn in that 40-year period? What had they learned that changed them? Well, they learned that God was more powerful than any other gods. They learned to depend on God for everything. They knew that God provides. God provided their food. He provided their water. He even made it to where their clothes and shoes didn't wear out. And they learned God's laws, and they learned to obey those commands. God gave them the laws, and God also would punish them. So they had first-hand knowledge of these things. These are things that we need to teach. And finally, they learned that when the time comes, you must stand up. They had been moved to believe, but they still had to go and cross the Red Sea, didn't they? You realize they were going from a wonderful area where they were provided for. Even they weren't going to make rich, but they were still getting their Social Security checks. And they were moving into a wilderness where there was nothing for them. When they came to the Jordan River, those priests, they had to have faith to step into the river, didn't they? You realize that they say that the people that have done these type of things say that the Ark of the Covenant probably weighed around 600 pounds, covered with gold. You take 4 men, that's 150 pounds each, and they're fixing to step off into a raging river. That took faith. Then we're going to destroy a city by walking around it and shouting. That took faith also. For us today, we're told in Ephesians 6:13, therefore take up the whole armor of God, that you may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. We have to be able to do that. We have to be able to have that faith that when the day of evil comes, it doesn't say if the day of evil comes, it says when the day of evil comes, when you're prepared and you've done everything you can, you still have to stand up. The world hasn't really changed. The names of the gods of humanism, but the beliefs are the same. You know, even in the Garden of Eden, it started to become a polytheistic world. You see, Adam and Eve, they wanted to be gods, didn't they? They wanted to be like God. They didn't stop believing in God, but they just wanted to be gods too. So that's where it started. You go to the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is a really wonderful book in that everything began in the book of Genesis. Not just the creation of man, not just the creation of the world, but also sin God's relationship to us and how God wanted to deal with our relationship and how God had a plan for our redemption. You find all of that in the book of Genesis. When man decided to start creating gods, it started in the Garden of Eden. Call it humanism. Then it advanced to the point where people started making them earthly or heavenly beings and gave them names. And now it's come back full circle to where now we live in a world of humanism again. They're the same gods, we just give them different names. But there's the same reasons. Those gods exist for the same reason. People still sacrifice babies. They don't sacrifice them to Moloch, but they do it for the same reason. They do it so that those selfish parents can be prosperous and happy in their mind and not be burdened with children. People still worship the gods for the purpose of pleasure and prosperity. That's the world we live in. The question today is, what does the world see when it looks at the disciples of Jesus? You know, believe it or not, when most of the world looks at Christianity, they don't look at us. They look at different denominations and different churches. And what do they see? They see, for much of it, they see denominations or different faith traditions that are trying to be like the world. They have prosperity preachers that tell you that you can live like the world, that you can have prosperity, that God owes you these things. In other words, they try to live as close to the world as they can instead of being different from the world. But we have to be careful that we're not the same way. We have to be careful that we don't try to be like the world. So, we're told to examine ourselves. When you examine yourselves, what do you see? Do you believe you're a disciple? Do you believe that there's more you could do to be a disciple? Do you believe here at League City we're making disciples? That's the questions we need to be asking ourselves. Well, if you don't believe that you're the disciple that you want to be and you want to do something different, or you would like to do something different, you're not sure what to do, then I would encourage you to talk to an elder about what you can do. Because Ephesians chapter 4 tells us that that's what the elders are to do. Elders are to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ. So now we're going to have an altar call. That means we're going to get up and we're going to sing a song of invitation. And you have the opportunity to come down and ask for prayer. Maybe you would like to ask for prayer for God to help you to be a better, more of a disciple. Maybe you would like to come forward to be baptized, that you've come to that decision. But sometimes when you come forward, you're setting an example. You become something for somebody else. Sometimes you come forward, and when you're saying truly in your heart you want to be a better disciple, but you know what you're also saying? If you got kids, you're telling your kids that, hey, mom or dad wants to be a better disciple. They see that. Or maybe somebody else in another pew sees that, and they see somebody like that they admire come down and go, man, I thought that person was a good disciple, or that person had it all. But they come down and see that person wants prayers. Sometimes we sit in the pew and we go, man, I'd really like prayer, but But maybe you're like me, you have a little bit too much inertia and you don't want to get up and come forward. Or it takes you that little bit of push. Maybe sometimes somebody else would see you come forward and they go, well, I'm going forward too. It just takes that little bit of encouragement. Sometimes men, your wives and your family need to see you come forward and ask for prayer. Because believe me, they know you're not perfect. It doesn't hurt for any of us sometimes to come down here and ask the whole congregation to pray for us. Because I believe that every person needs prayers. So we're going to do that now. We're going to give you that opportunity to come forward. So, Elijah, if you would.